Please be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
So long before there were the Avengers and X-Men and Power Rangers and Transformers and all these other superheroes, there was a guy named Superman. When I was 7 years old, I wanted to be Superman. I never missed one of the TV shows. Back then it was the black and white variety with special effects that were just as comical back then as they are today. I had a Superman costume. I'm telling y'all a lot now. Don't be spreading this around. I had a Superman costume and a great big red cape that I wore just about every day of the summer. And if that's not enough, I had a little white chihuahua that I named Superdog. And for a while, I truly believed that I put on that red cape, and if I had enough faith, that I would be faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and above all, I would have the power to fly. And I tried and I tried. I put on that cape, and I would literally run across the yard, and then I would jump, and I would crash and burn. The only thing I ever got were a bunch of bruises and scrapes, and years later my mom actually confessed that she was scared to death that I was going to go up on the second floor balcony and try to fly from there. I never did fly, so I had to settle for keeping my feet on the ground and to learn to live as a mere mortal. I don't know if Jesus had the power to fly, but today's gospel seems to me to be about Jesus discovering the power that he has and how he will use it and how it will guide his life and ministry. Now, a lot of this gospel story, there's a lot made to this story, so much so that when it's read, this is for the older folks in the room. I wonder if any of y'all remember the comedian Flip Wilson. Right? You hear this story and you kind of see this image of the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and that classic line, "The devil made me do it." But I suspect that if we had been there, we wouldn't have seen anybody at all, except for Jesus. That doesn't mean that Jesus was alone. It just means that all you could see was Jesus. After all, that I think is what temptation really is about. It's about that little voice that rattles around in your head, trying to get you to believe something that's not true. Now let's be clear, the temptations with which Jesus is enticed are not bad things. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to turn a rock into bread? Right? I mean, say the word, who fixed the hunger of the world? That'd be pretty cool. Or here, "I'll give you the kingdoms of the world, Jesus, and you can be in control." I don't know about you, but I suspect that Jesus could probably do a better job at politics and justice than we've done. Or how about this? Jump off the temple, Jesus, and God will save you. And then the whole world will know for sure who you truly are. Certainty about God in a world of uncertainty. That'd be really nice. You see, at the heart of this story, Jesus is not being tempted so much between right and wrong. Jesus is being tempted to use his power in a way that there would no longer be the need for faith. No more helplessness, no more hunger, no more suffering, no more uncertainty. Who wouldn't like to have some of that? And in truth, Jesus will one day feed the hungry. And on another day, Jesus will do wonderful things that will inspire people to believe in him. And his ministry will impact the political powers of the world, and it still does. But the difference between those days and this day in the wilderness is that Jesus will not use his power for himself, for his own comfort, his own security, his own popularity. And 3 times he's tested, 3 times he says no. Jesus is kind of saying no to a life of quick fixes, control, and certainty. Thereby saying yes to a life of trust. A life of trust in God. He's saying yes to the power of love. The kind of love that does not seek its own gain. That is totally selfless. The kind of love that is willing to give up one's life, he will tell us on another night. The kind of love that will not coerce, manipulate, and control, but is more about letting go, which is hard work, isn't it? The kind of love that will one day guide Jesus and us all the way to the cross. But what about us? We're not Jesus. What about right here? What about this Sunday? Let me give it a try. After his confirmation, Ryan, after her reception, reaffirmation, insert your name, was so full of the Holy Spirit that he returned from Holy Cross and was led by the Spirit out there into the wilderness. That's what's going on today. Like Jesus, we too can find ourselves in the wilderness, and I know from some of y'all's letters, you've been there. Sometimes it lasts a few hours, sometimes 40 days, and sometimes it can feel like a lifetime. Times when we feel alone and helpless, times that we're just kind of drifting around in life, times we hear a voice rattling around in our head, voices that whisper to you, you're not really good enough. You're not really religious enough. You just don't have enough faith. And while Jesus survived his wilderness, we're not Jesus, and so we're not always so sure that we will. I hope I'm not alone. I wish I could detail for you a quick fix out of the wilderness. So if you're waiting for that now in the sermon, I don't have it. I wish I could give you an easy plan to make your way through your struggles. I can't. Sometimes it happens. God kind of just miraculously intervenes. The struggle, the voices, the wilderness kind of just goes away, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way, and the wilderness only gets deeper, and we cry out, Lord, deliver us, but we're not delivered. What then? Okay? We good? All right. Sometimes the wilderness kind of crashes in. If you need an example. I don't have a quick fix, but I am going to give you a couple of thoughts to make your way. First of all, temptation is not necessarily for the lack of faith, but it may be the result of your faith. Right? I mean, Jesus was tempted, but we don't say it was because he lacked faith or that he did something wrong to deserve it. In fact, we're just told that he's full of the power of the Holy Spirit. At the same time, it's true for any of us. In other words, temptation doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It's not what we're lacking. Temptation is not set a sign of the absence of God. In fact, it might be quite the opposite. That God is working a way in the soul of your life that you just can't yet feel it or sense it. John Claypool, who was a noted preacher in the Episcopal Church, was once in the midst of his teaching. He was known for his teaching on suffering and hope in his own wilderness, which was the sickness and eventual death of his 10-year-old daughter due to leukemia. This is one of the greatest preachers in the world. And later on, a friend asked him, when was it that you knew God's presence and power during that wilderness time? And Claypool says, I had to think about that. And Claypool writes that it happened as he was standing beside his daughter at the bedside in the hospital. And Laura Lou was suffering more than she had ever suffered. It was so intense. And he said, everything in my being wanted to run out of the room and hide and scream. And as helpless as he felt, he writes, but my fear didn't get the best of me. And Claypool claims that that's when the moment that he knew God's power was near, because it was only through God's power that he was able to stay at her side. What I'm trying to get at with that story, and the point I'm trying to make, is sometimes the greatest manifestation of God's power in love is simply trusting. To stay put. Especially when there are no quick fixes and we are helpless and we feel out of control. To allow ourselves to trust that God is still at work even when we cannot sense it. The second way forward lies in the work of remembering. Remembering is an important part of our tradition. You heard it in the first reading. Moses is trying to get the people to remember who they are and whose they are. A wandering Aramaean was my ancestor. He's trying to get them to remember who they are and whose they are because we so often forget. Well, I'm having a hard time right now. So let me simply remind you of this. When you find yourself in the wilderness and your life feels out of control, or you don't feel good enough, you don't feel faithful enough, when you're helpless and there's no answers, try this exercise. When was the last time you do remember God? When was that moment that you knew that it was true, and let that memory carry you? Because you see, the God who once was will always be. God will continue to find you. And if you're having a hard time remembering a moment, then let me remind you of this moment. In the gospel, after Jesus' baptism. Baptism is the context of his wilderness, and we're about to do it right here because confirmation is, in a sense, about baptism. So to those of you being confirmed and received and reaffirmed, I am thrilled that you're becoming an Episcopalian. But this service is far less about your religion as it is your relationship. So please don't ever forget, and this is for all of you, that in your baptism, you were claimed as God's beloved child. You were marked as Christ's own forever. And if forever is forever, then it's forever. And because of that, whether it was last year or 40 years ago, whether you were dunked, dipped, or splashed, the mark of Christ endures. The Spirit of God is with you. Because you've been claimed by God, and God will never give up on you. You see, as far as I know, and I hope I'm right about this, nobody in this room has the power to fly with a red cape. But dear friends, in God's Holy Spirit, there is a power in this world that is very near to you even now. It is the same power that guided Jesus through the wilderness and to the cross and beyond. And because of that power and what happened on Easter Sunday, you're sitting in a church 2,000 years later. That's a power. It is the way and the truth and life of love. It is bestowed on you in your baptism, and because of that, God will never lose you. Not even in the wilderness. Not even the wilderness that we know is death. God's never going to give up on us. This is the power of God's love at work for you and in you. Y'all, this is how much God trusts you. This is how much God trusts you. This is how much your life matters. To God and for God when we get back out there in the world. This time we continue with the sacrament of confirmation.